She was seduced, blackmailed, and almost lost everything. Not out of weakness, but out of loneliness. A story about betrayal, deceit, and the love that survived them both. The suite at the Peninsula Hotel in Chicago was the kind that made anyone forget, for a few moments, the weight of carrying a company of 500 employees on their shoulders. Diana Mercer threw her high heels onto the beige carpet and let herself fall into the navy blue velvet armchair by the window. Outside, the city twinkled like an electrical circuit, indifferent to her weariness. 55 years old. 22 years married to Robert. 3 grown children. CEO of Mercer and Associates, one of the largest financial consulting firms in the American Midwest. She had built it all brick by brick, sacrificing weekends, vacations, and nights of sleep. And now she was alone in a hotel room, with a $40 million contract signed in her briefcase and a dinner ahead of her that she didn't have the energy to face. The phone vibrated. It was Robert. "Did you manage to close it?" His voice sounded distant, not because of the line, but because of something Diana hadn't been able to name for years. "I've closed the deal. 40 million, Robert." She waited for a reaction that didn't come with the enthusiasm she needed. "I'm exhausted. Rest. Call me tomorrow." A pause. "Good night, Dee." "Good night." She stared at the black screen of her cell phone for a long moment before getting up, reapplying her burgundy lipstick, and going down to the hotel bar because, after all, she deserved a single glass of Bordeaux. The bar was packed that Thursday. Diana found the only available stool at the counter and ordered wine without even opening the menu. That's when she heard the voice. "Bordeaux 2018. A good choice." The man next to her raised his glass in an informal toast, especially after a day that clearly cost a fortune. She glanced at him sideways. In his early 30s, with slightly messy brown hair, a gray suit without a tie, a smile with a calculated flaw, a slightly crooked canine tooth that somehow made everything more honest. "How do you know it was an expensive day?" Diana asked, more out of social reflex than genuine interest. Because women who arrive at hotel bars at 10 o'clock at night with their lipstick reapplied aren't there to celebrate. They're there to breathe. Diana laughed. It was a small, involuntary laugh, the kind that escapes before you even realize it. "Interesting theory." She turned to him. "Diana."
"Ethan."
He extended his hand. "Ethan Cole." They talked for 2 hours. Ethan claimed to be an independent investment consultant specializing in tech startups. He had good stories: Chicago, Austin, San Francisco, and told each one with a precision that seemed authentic. Diana, who had spent her entire life evaluating people in boardrooms, didn't find a single flaw. He listened to her in a way Robert hadn't done years ago. Leaning slightly forward, his eyes fixed on her, as if every word she said was the most interesting in the world. "You manage 500 people and you still feel like you need to prove something," Ethan said, more as an observation than a judgment. "That's exhausting, Diana. You know nothing about me." "I know enough." His eyes met hers with a calmness that was, she admitted internally, utterly disconcerting. "I know you're the smartest person in this room and that you spent all night waiting for someone to notice." The silence between them grew thick. "That was one line," she said. "It was an observation," he smiled. "But if you want to treat it as a line, you can." Diana hadn't planned it. That was the truth she would repeat to herself in the following months, like a mantra of self-preservation. She hadn't planned it. But when Ethan suggested they go upstairs to see the city view from the private terrace that came with his suite, just the view, Diana, Chicago at night is priceless. She didn't say no. The terrace was made of glass and wind. Chicago spread out beneath them like a jewel fallen on the asphalt. "Are you afraid of something?" Ethan asked, his back to the city, looking at it. "I'm not the type to admit to being afraid. Everyone has one." He took a step closer. "Which one is yours?" Diana should have taken a step back. She should have laughed, said, "Look, that was a great conversation," and gone back to her suite. She should have called Robert. He did none of that. "To stop feeling," she said, her voice lower than she intended. Ethan didn't answer with words. He raised his hand slowly, as if giving her time to recoil, and touched her face with his fingertips, jaw, cheekbone, the corner of her lips. Diana, he said, just the name, as if it were both a question and an answer at the same time. And she left. What happened that night was simultaneously everything she had forgotten could exist, and everything she knew she was destroying. Ethan touched her with an attention that seemed obsessive, appreciating every inch of her, every curve that the years had shaped, without the careless haste she had become accustomed to. He murmured things in her ear, alternating between an almost inaudible whisper and a hoarse urgency that completely disoriented her. "Look at me," he pleaded at one point, cupping her face in his hands. "Don't run away." And Diana, who had spent 20 years being the most controlled person in any room, completely lost control. When she left, at 3 a.m, he was asleep. She grabbed her purse, closed the door quietly, went back to her suite, and sat on the edge of the bed for an hour, unable to cry and unable to stop crying. What was that, she thought? What have I done? Life returned to normal with disturbing ease. That was what scared Diana most in the following weeks, how easy it was to pretend nothing had happened. Robert picked her up at the airport with a distracted hug and the usual question, "Did everything go well?" The children sent congratulatory messages about the contract. The company kept running. Chicago became a stone inside my chest. Small but always there. It was 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday in November, that the universe decided to collect its due. Diana was leaving a meeting in downtown Detroit when her cell phone rang with an unknown number. Diana Mercer? The voice was familiar even before she could process where it came from. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "Ethan? Hi." A smile in her voice. "Surprised? How did you get my number?" The coldness came quickly, but her hands had trembled for a second before she managed to control them. "I have my ways." Pause. "I'm in Detroit, Diana. I moved here 2 weeks ago." Strange coincidence, isn't it? It was no coincidence. She would know that later. At that moment, however, her heart did something foolish and involuntary. It raced. They met at a discreet cafe in Midtown 3 days later. Diana had rehearsed what she was going to say. "It was a mistake. It can't happen again. I need you to respect that." She said all that. Ethan listened with that slightly crooked smile and his eyes fixed on her. "Do you believe what you're saying?" he asked when she finished. "Of course I believe it." His voice says one thing. His gaze says another. "Ethan, Diana." He leaned across the table. "I'm not asking you to abandon your life. I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give. I'm just saying that what happened in Chicago was real. It was real for you too." She didn't answer. "Tell me it wasn't," he challenged softly. She couldn't do it. The affair lasted 2 months. Diana knew it was madness. She knew it with every functioning neuron she possessed. But there was something about Ethan that acted like a switch she couldn't turn off. He made her feel desired in a way she hadn't experienced in years. He asked her about her childhood, her fears, her ambitions. He laughed at the same things she did. In every way, he seemed genuine. It seemed so. They met in apartments he rented seasonally, always changing them, always discreetly. Ethan said it was for her safety. "You're a public figure, Diana. I can't expose you." She thought it was out of caution. It was protocol. One January night, after the snowstorm closed the roads and they were stuck in their Corktown apartment for hours, Diana found herself thinking she was happy. Not the constant, functional kind of happiness she had with Robert, but a sharp, precipice-edge happiness that hurt a little. Ethan was lying beside her, tracing slow lines across her shoulder. "Tell me about your husband," he said suddenly. Diana frowned. "Why?" "Curiosity. This is not a conversation I want to have here. Does he make you happy?"
"Ethan."
"He answers me." Diana was silent for a moment. "Robert is a good man." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll receive."
Ethan didn't insist.
But something in his smile at that moment, a slightly calculated satisfaction that vanished all too quickly, should have set off alarm bells. It didn't. Everything changed in February. Ethan appeared at the cafe, where they always met, with an expression Diana had never seen on him before, tense, his restless eyes scanning the room. "I need to talk to you," he said before even sitting down. "What happened?" "I have a serious problem." He lowered his voice. There's a guy, a former business partner, who has compromising material. Photos. From our time together. Diana felt her blood run cold. What kind of photos? From the hotel in Chicago. He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't know, Diana. I swear I didn't know. He must have installed something in the room. He's pressuring me to pay or he'll send it all to your husband, to the press. Wait. Diana raised her hand. Wait a second. She took a deep breath. How long? Ethan looked at the table. $80,000. The silence lasted a long time. 80,000, she repeated, her voice completely flat. Diana, I know what it looks like. But that guy is dangerous, I know him. Do you have proof of what you're saying? I have his messages. I can show you everything. He grabbed his cell phone and shoved it across the table. The messages were there, explicit threats, references to photos of the suite in Chicago, an account number for a deposit. Diana had studied cell phones for a long time. A part of her, the part that had built a company from scratch, that had gone through 20 years of negotiations and evaluated hundreds of contracts, said no. It said this is a trap. But there was another part. The part that was afraid. The part that couldn't imagine Robert receiving those photos. The part that, she admitted now, still felt something for Ethan Cole and didn't want to believe the worst. She transferred the $80,000 3 days later. Robert Mercer was the kind of man who noticed everything and said little. An architect by career, a compulsive reader, a present father, he had built his life around a stability that sometimes bordered on invisibility. It was what Diana didn't see until it was too late. He discovered it by chance, in the most mundane way possible, a printed bank statement that fell out of her purse one morning in March. $80,000 transferred to a physical account in Michigan. What is this? He asked, holding the paper as she came down the stairs. Diana saw him and knew, in a second, that it was all over. She tried to explain. It came out in a fragmented, desperate version, full of gaps. Chicago, Ethan, the blackmail, the money. Robert stood motionless while she spoke, the paper in his hand, his face growing progressively whiter. When she finished, he carefully folded the extract, placed it on the kitchen counter, and said, with a quietness that was worse than any scream, "You slept with him." It wasn't a question. Robert, no. He raised his hand.
Not now.
I can't now. He grabbed his coat and car keys and left. Diana stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the folded extractor on the counter. The divorce lawyer Diana hired was meticulous. And it was the asset investigation, a routine requirement in property division proceedings, that pulled the first thread. The account to which Diana had transferred the $80,000 did not belong to any blackmailing partner. It belonged to an LLC created 6 months earlier in the name of an intermediary. The private investigator that Robert's lawyer hired, because Robert, quiet as he was not passive, found the rest in 3 weeks. Ethan Cole, 36 years old, from Columbus, Ohio. 2 criminal cases in the state of Illinois, fraud and swindling, both dismissed for lack of evidence or out-of-court settlement. 4 women identified in the last 5 years, an executive in Minneapolis, a doctor in Nashville, a businesswoman in Atlanta, a lawyer in Denver. All with a similar profile. Successful, in their 50s, married, traveling alone on business. All had transferred amounts between $50,000 and $120,000 to different accounts. The rooftop scam, as investigators informally called it, had a script. The hotel bar. The conversation. The insightful observation about loneliness. The rooftop. The weeks of close proximity in the victim's city. The fabricated blackmail. Ethan Cole hadn't been blackmailed by anyone. He was the blackmail. When the lawyers presented the report in a neutral meeting room, with both of them present for the first time in 3 months, Diana read every page without blinking. Robert stood across the table, his gaze fixed on the window. He did this with 4 other women, said the lawyer. There's an open investigation in the state of Illinois. The Detroit Police Department was notified this week. Robert said nothing. Diana closed the report. I was an idiot. You were a victim, the lawyer corrected with professional neutrality. Both things could be true, she said. The divorce took a long time. These processes always take a long time when there are assets, businesses, adult children, and 22 years of accumulated history. Robert had rented an apartment in Midtown. Diana stayed in the house they had bought together when the children were still small, but each room had taken on the quality of a museum, filled with objects that told an interrupted story. The children each reacted in their own way. The eldest, Caroline, sided with her father with fierce and silent loyalty. The middle child, Thomas, tried to mediate and ended up exhausted by both of them. The youngest, Sophie, called Diana at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night and simply said, "Mom, I love you, but you needed to tell me," and the two cried together without resolving anything. Diana threw everything into her work, as she always had. She closed 2 new contracts, expanded the company into the Washington market, and hired 40 people. Outside of the office, Mercer and Associates had never been so profitable. Inside, she would wake up at 4 in the morning with that lump in her chest, no longer Ethan, who had dissolved into disgust and shame. Robert, the way he had folded the extract, the stillness that was worse than any scream. Robert, for his part, wasn't doing well, but he was the type who wouldn't let anyone see it completely. He resumed an architectural project he had abandoned years before, a housing complex in East Detroit. He worked late. He read a lot. He ate lunch alone. But one afternoon in May, 3 weeks after the report on Ethan Cole was presented, he called his middle son.
Thomas.
Do you think his mother knew who he was? Thomas was silent for a second. No, Dad. Are you sure?
Dad.
You know Mom. Robert remained silent. You know her, Thomas repeated more slowly. It was in early June, 7 months after Chicago, that Robert appeared at the door at 7 o'clock on a Friday evening. Diana opened the door, and they both stood on the threshold for a moment, his hands in his pockets, hers with a glass of wine she'd forgotten she was holding. "May I come in?" he asked. "It's your home, too." "That's not what the process says." "Robert, come in." They sat in the living room. Her wine remained untouched on the coffee table. Neither of them knew exactly how to begin, so they remained silent long enough for the silence to speak for itself. "I read the entire report 3 times, Robert said finally. "I know." He had a script. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. "You were step 6 of a manual." "Robert, I know that won't change. Let me finish." He looked at her. "I spent 7 months trying to understand what I did wrong. Because that's what we do, right? When someone we love makes a choice like that, the first question is, what did I fail to give?" Diana closed her eyes. "And the honest answer," Robert continued, his voice slightly hoarse, "is that I stopped showing up. Not physically, but I stopped seeing you, asking how you were feeling, noticing when you arrived tired and needed more than a good night on the phone. It wasn't your fault. No, it wasn't. But I wasn't innocent." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "He found an open window because I left windows open, Diana." She didn't answer because he wasn't wrong, and both things could be true at the same time. "I hated you," Robert said. "For months. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with a rage I didn't know I could contain." He paused. "But you're the person I've known for 26 years. I know how you drink your coffee. I know the way you laugh when you find something genuinely funny. I know you're the best mother our children could have had." His voice faltered slightly. "I can't just let all that go to waste because a criminal found you in a bar." Diana was crying. Not the restrained, controlled crying she had practiced alone for months. It was the crying of someone who finally stops holding back. "I'm so sorry," she said, and the words were inadequate for the weight of what they had to carry, but they were the only ones she had. "Robert, I'm so sorry. There's no excuse. There's only the fact that I was wrong and that I was stupid and that I hurt you in a way you didn't deserve, and that if I could, I know." He got up from the sofa and went to sit next to her. He didn't hug her immediately. He just stayed close, shoulder to shoulder. "I know." They didn't go back to what they were. Robert and Diana Mercer understood this early in the reconciliation process, that trying to rebuild their previous marriage would be like trying to reassemble a broken vase without admitting it was broken. What they built was different. More honest in some aspects, more fragile in others, more conscious in all. Ethan Cole was indicted by the Michigan Department of Justice in August, with 7 confirmed victims in 5 states. Diana testified. It was difficult, sitting in a room and describing in detail how she had been deceived, how she had ignored the signs, how she had transferred $80,000 to a con artist while believing she was protecting her family. The prosecutor was kind. That made it harder in a way. When he left the courthouse that day, Robert was waiting in the parking lot. He hadn't arranged it. He was simply there. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Not really," she said honestly. He opened his arm and she rested her head on his shoulder, not with the automatic familiarity of 20 years of habit, but with the awareness that this was not guaranteed, that it was a choice they both made every day. "Shall we go home?" Robert asked. Diana looked at him, the wrinkles near his eyes that she knew by heart, his hair grayer than it had been a year ago, the firmness that had always been in him, and replied, "Let's go."